What's happening, everybody? Welcome to episode 43. BetParks presents Stick to Hockey Live with Jason Myrtetus. Charlie O'Connor from The Athletic is going to join us momentarily. A lot to talk about. We actually have a day game today, 1 o'clock matinee hockey for Martin Luther King Day in Boston at TD Garden. Ho-hum, Flyers are playing the best team in the NHL who've lost one game in regulation on their home ice. And they've won 5 straight on the road. So we'll see how this plays out today against, obviously, a really good team, perhaps the best team in the NHL. Let me tell you about BetParks first, though. You can get some action on that game. How about TK to score? First to score. He's coming off a game where he didn't end up on the score sheet. That hasn't happened a lot this year. You can get him at plus 1,400 on the BetParks app right now to be the first to score, or first goal or last goal, or plus 700 to score it all. Check out the BetParks app. It's fantastic. It's the best mobile casino and sportsbook app you're going to find. It's easy to use, easy to navigate, faster to win than ever before. And right now, all BetParks users can use the promo code JASON750. New and existing. That'll get you a risk-free bet up to $750. Terms and conditions do apply. Do yourself a favor. You got a lot of hockey action today. Get on the BetParks app. Download it. You do need to be over 21 and present in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. January, New Year, great time to visit Conquerville Subaru. The work they continue to do in the community is unparalleled. Matter of fact, they were the first Subaru Nation Love Promise Dealer of the Year winner back in 2015, and they continue their great work with the Nemours Children's Hospital of Delaware, the 15 classrooms that they adopt at Marcus Hook Elementary School, donating $500 each for classroom supplies, plus the donations of thousands of coats. This is the time of year to La Hispania Humanidad in Kennett Square. They've done that for a decade and continue to do it as well. So check it out. It's the new year. Get to the great dealership on Route 202 in Glen Mills. See the certified pre-owned inventory, the Subaru vehicles in stock, and take it for a test drive. And also check out the service department where you'll get a free car wash with every visit. Do yourself a favor. Visit ConquervilleSubaru.com and check them out on Route 202 in Glen Mills. And remember that Conquerville cares. All right, let's get right to the business with the man. We haven't had him on for a while. He was living out of boxes the last time we had him on. He is, of course, Charlie O'Connor. He's the lead writer for The Athletic, co-host of BSH Radio. He's a ginger, and I'm surprised he's an Android user. Charlie?
I am an Android user. Yeah, my friends get very frustrated with that fact because they're all iPod users or iPhone users. So, but, like the Android, what can I say?
I would have pegged you as an iPhone guy. But anyway, there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we have a game today, and the team has won 7 of 8. They've won 5 straight on the road. Scott Lawton is scoring power play goals. The team leads the NHL in shorthanded goals. Carter Hart, 12-1-1 when he sees more than 40 shots in a game. What is going on? What's kind of your overall assessment at this moment here on January 16th?
In all honesty, I think the best way on my side to interpret this is that they're just buying into what John Tortorella is selling. I think the first half of the year, a lot of this was number one, and we've talked about this on the show, is just that this is not a team that has a ton of talent, particularly on the high end side. So if they're going to win games, they're going to have to do it by doing it as a collective, and buying into a system and really doing exactly what the coach wants them to do. And it takes time. It takes time with a new coach to learn the ins and outs and expectations and all the details of a system. They've made some tweaks to the system over the last month or so to better fit the personnel as well. So it's not just on the players, that the coaches have adapted as well. But I think, if the John Tortorella experiment wasn't going to completely blow up in their faces, it was probably always going to get better in the second half. And right now we've literally just moved into the second half. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a Flyers team that is more playing John Tortorella hockey. Add in the fact that I think they got some momentum off of that California trip when they were playing against some not so great teams. And now they're just kind of riding that high. And it's clearly carrying over against legitimately better teams like the Sabres and especially the Washington Capitals this week.
You see it. You can gain momentum and confidence as a team when you have a clump in your schedule of slop. That's what that was with San Jose and Anaheim and Arizona, and that got the ball rolling. And they, like you said, they've taken it again now against good teams, and they'll take it into Boston today against a really good team. I mean, that team is unbelievable. One of the things, Charlie, that Torts talked quite a bit about. I mean, the Flyers did a whole series called The Standard on their YouTube channel, and we've heard about Torts right away when he was hired. I got to get that locker room right. It was fractured, blah, blah, blah. And the call to add the Standard back in here to Flyers hockey and the culture, how much have you seen it move in that direction? Because you're in that locker room quite a bit. You talk to a guy both, at game days and practice days. What have you seen from kind of a culture and standard standpoint?
Yeah, I think they're getting there. I don't think they're all the way there. I think there's probably some guys who haven't fully bought in, but they've at least bought in enough that the team can play. I think the word that John Tortorella used after the Washington game in DC that I went down to cover was that we're just playing cohesive hockey. And I think that's a really good way to describe it is they're playing cohesive hockey. The gaps between the forwards and the defensemen, on breakouts, on the forecheck, they're not huge. It's just they're playing as a five-man unit. And look, we all know what this team is. This team isn't a juggernaut. There's only so much that John Tortorella can get out of the Philadelphia Flyers. And you saw that in the third period in DC. The Capitals realized, oh no, we're going to lose to the Flyers for the second time in 3 days. And
Yeah.
came out in the third period and honestly bulldozed the Flyers. They were all over them. The talent advantage was obvious. For the Flyers, they got lucky. I mean, maybe not luck is the best word to use, but they had Carter Hart, and Carter Hart basically saved them. And he stood on his head and held the 3-1 lead. But there is a talent weakness on this team that John Tortorella can't deal with in the short term. But what he can do is he can get the team playing a more cohesive, effort based brand of hockey. And I think that's what's happening right now. And it's enough to win games. First off, it's enough to beat bad teams. It's
Yeah.
enough to make them be a cut above the teams that are truly tanking, like the Arizonas, like the Anaheim Ducks, teams like that. They're going to play Chicago this week. That's another team that's very clearly tanking. They're better than those teams. And it can allow them to beat superior teams, and superior teams either A, don't take them seriously enough on a single game basis, or just don't have their A game.
Yeah.
Maybe the Capitals, I think, especially on Saturday, in the first two periods, they probably had their C plus game. And the
Hmm.
Flyers, because they're playing cohesive hockey, because Tortorella is helping them get a lot out of the limited talent that they have, they can beat a good team when that good team is playing their C plus game.
Yeah. 14 saves in the second period for Carter Hart after giving up the one goal in the first on 7 shots, and then 19 saves in the third. That's how you cement it with your goaltender. And he's had some great performances this year. That was one of them for Carter. With Torts too, you mentioned, the gaps are tighter and this team is scoring now. Charlie, they couldn't throw the puck in the ocean from the edge of the beach in the beginning of the year. It wasn't because they didn't get to the beach, but they just didn't have the talent to score. And to your point about, teams that are tanking, there's, teams with inferior talent that work hard and are coached well. And then there's teams with inferior talent that don't work hard and aren't coached well.
Yeah.
And I think we saw that, especially with Anaheim. But, covering Torts, you probably had a preconceived notion before you came in this year. You probably heard from some people when he was hired in the industry. What have you learned about him since you've been covering him? They
Well, I
maybe
think
weren't expecting.
yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, truthfully, and what's funny about this is that people in the media weren't the only people who had this preconceived notion. It's just this idea that Torts is a defense only coach.
Mm-hmm.
That's the narrative that comes out
Hot
around him.
shots.
Yeah, and that's not to say he's not.
Yeah.
Defense is very important to Tortorella. Structure is very important to Tortorella. There are non-negotiables when it comes to John Tortorella. Absolutely. However, he's not that guy entirely. He's willing to let guys play fast, go for offense, take risks. Like I did a feature a few weeks back on Cam York. And I talked to Cam about, obviously he got the call up. He's been playing really well. He's very much in John Tortorella's good graces. And I asked Cam straight up, I was like, what happened to you in training camp? Because he was not this guy in training camp. I was there. I watched the games. I watched the practices. He looked thoroughly underwhelming. And York was honestly more honest than I thought he was going to be. And what he basically said is that he came into camp and he was so terrified of Tortorella and had this idea in his head based on what he had read and what he had heard about Tortorella, that Tortorella was just like, he had to play defense, defense, and it was defense first. And that's the only way he's going to make the team. That's the only way he's not going to, be on the bad side of John Tortorella. And then when they sent Cam York down, John Tortorella basically went up in front of the media and was like, what was frustrating about Cam is that I heard all these stories about this guy with offensive talent, this guy who can push the play, this guy who can rove around and impact the game on a nightly basis. I didn't see that guy. I want to see that guy. And
He
York
needs to be
basically
that at the
told me,
NHL. Yeah.
yeah, and York basically told me that it took a while for me to accept that my preconceived notion of John Tortorella was not correct. That John Tortorella is willing, and not only willing, but wants me to play, as he put it, more like a rover. And that's not what a lot of people think of when they think of John Tortorella. They think, he benches guys and he scratches guys if they make a defensive mistake. And you know what? There's truth to that. We're seeing that
Yep.
with Kevin Hayes. But there's a give and take there. And I think what we're seeing here is that he's not this, stick in the mud, only play defense, only win games 2-1 type of coach that a lot of people, I think, going in felt like he was.
I think that Cam, that's a great question that you asked him, and I love the response that he gave. I would love for him to sit down with the guy who's not playing the rest of the year, and Zach Werenski, because he was kind of that guy in,
Yeah.
you got to do certain things in the D zone because you are a defenseman, but I don't want you to play safe because your greatest skill is to push the pace and push the puck up the ice. And Cam's doing that now, and he looks far different. The other thing with Torts, he's very philosophical. I don't know that he was like this in Tampa or New York. I talked to some people, and I think he was a coach then, Charlie, but I think he's more of a professor now. He's got
Yeah.
another degree.
It's fair. And I think a lot of it, and he's acknowledged this, that he had to change, that he
Yeah.
had to adjust
Evolve.
the way he coaches. He had to evolve. And that's the only way he was going to stay in the game, because honestly, the players had changed. And not just the players, but the players as people. They needed a different type of coach. And Tortorella said that, when he was in Tampa, he kind of like scripted everything out. If this guy does this in the neutral zone, you do this, and if this guy does this, you do this. It was very much like, if A then B, if B then C. And he tried to basically coach the players to do exactly what he wanted them to do. And what he said is that these players, over the last decade or so, you can't do that because they'll chafe under it. They want that freedom. They want that ability to freelance a little bit and to feel like they're making decisions, that they're not just doing exactly what the coach tells them at every moment of the game. And to Tortorella's credit, he adapted. Now, he's still John Tortorella. I mean, he's still going to, bench Tony DeAngelo for 2 periods if he has an awful turnover and then has a really bad shift to start the next period. Like, he's still John Tortorella. He's
Still in his DNA.
Yeah, I mean, for lack of a better term, like, he's still a hard ass. He is, but there is more give. There is more of, I understand that the player today is different than the player even 15 years ago, and I need to adapt if I'm not going to die in this league, for lack of a better word.
No players benefited from that philosophy of Torts and that evolution of Torts than Travis Konechny. 15 years ago, he would have drove Torts up a wall, and they would have clashed all the time. Now Torts seems like he's really willing to let TK be TK. He's going to make mistakes. Everybody does, but he doesn't want him to then, after a mistake, have the fear of God in him that he's going to play safe and not incur any risk going forward. And he's played his way through his mistakes. He just ended that 10-game point streak with 20 points, didn't score in the last game. Has only gone back-to-back games without a point one time this season, Charlie. I mean, this guy has hit his absolute prime, and he's having a career. He's having a great season.
Yeah. Konechny's been incredible. And you talked a little bit earlier about the problem of scoring, with this team. Obviously, they kind of lack the high-end talent of, teams like Toronto and whatnot. But obviously, one of the reasons why they have been scoring a lot more is because Travis Konechny has just absolutely been on fire. And, the more I think about Konechny, it's funny. He obviously had that really strong year in 2019, 2020, right before everything got shut down due to the pandemic. And then came back in the bubble, didn't score a goal. Obviously, was really frustrated. And then kind of the whole thing fell apart in Philadelphia. And the last 2 years have been, I wouldn't say awful for Konechny, but certainly disappointing. He wasn't building off of that. Yeah, he wasn't building off of that big year. And I think there became a consensus, particularly in the online community, that 2019-2020 season, that was a fluke, that was just everything went right for Konechny. That was his career year. And that's something that we can no longer expect from Travis Konechny. And I'm kind of coming around on the possibility that, like, maybe the last 2 years were the fluke. And maybe this is a case of a guy who kind of got caught up in his own head because he got really frustrated about not being able to score in the weirdest the weirdest
Yeah.
playoff in history in front of 0 fans in a bubble. And then when the entire organization kind of fell apart over the last couple of years and it was just a team in disarray, that it really ate at Konechny and it just kind of messed with his head. And now that things have a bit more structure and make a little bit more sense, and there's a coach at the top who is fully invested in this team's success and has job security and whatnot, that Konechny is kind of just sort of picking up where he left off, except almost better. Because I mean, if you think about it, in 2019, 2020, yeah, he was very good. He had a very, very good season. He nearly was point per game. He did it on a team with Sean Couturier and Claude Giroux. Like, he had a lot of help. He was on their lines a lot of times. He was on their power play a lot of times. Now, like, I'm not saying that this Flyers team top to bottom is terrible, but like, let's be honest, there's no Sean Couturier or Claude Giroux on this team. Like,
Yep.
Travis Konechny is doing a lot of this pretty much on his own. Like, Joel Farabee's kind of rounding back into form after a slow start, but like, Noah Cates is the 1C right now,
Yeah,
sort of.
crazy. Mhm.
Like, this is not a team that's, like, Travis Konechny isn't piggybacking off of someone else to score his points. He's driving the offense.
Yeah.
And he wasn't doing that in 2019, 2020, even if he was the lead scorer on the team. Like, the offense drivers were Giroux and Couturier. Those guys are gone, and Konechny's scoring at an even higher rate than he did then. So, maybe this is the real Travis Konechny, at least offensively.
Yeah, in his prime, probably very well may be. There's 3 back-to-back-to-back 24-goal seasons, but as you mentioned, in 1920, he did it in 66 games played. So he was 29-goal pace that year. And then the bubble, obviously, he still ended up with decent numbers in those last 2 years because of the amount of assists that he had. But, you need goals from a guy like TK. And you mentioned kind of that frustration of the pandemic and where the organization was. And I don't think there's any guy that it seems more evident to me that's dealing with that and having a hard time with that than Ivan Provorov. Coming in under Torts and accountability. We know that press conference at the end of last year where he got really saucy with the media and you guys know it all, blah, blah, blah. And it really looked like there was no self-accountability the way he presented himself in that press conference. But his play, I think, has been good at times this year, but he hasn't re-arced on a trend upward like Konechny has. That's the problem.
Exactly. And that's the thing where, I do believe, and I think, last offseason, I think everything was theoretically on the table for the Flyers. I ultimately don't agree with the path they actually chose, but I think they explored a lot of potential options. And I think that they at least discussed the possibility of, looking to trade one or both of Konechny or Provorov. But I think what it ended up being was that they looked at it and they're like, if we trade these guys, we're going to be selling low. We're going to be selling them at their lowest value. We want to see, number one, if they could be part of the long-term solution. But number two, even if we ultimately have to trade them, let's try to increase their value. Let's try to, rehabilitate their value before we do. Obviously, Travis Konechny has done so. I don't think they're going to trade Travis Konechny, but if they did, they get a heck of a lot more for them than they would have got if they would have traded him last summer. Whereas Ivan Provorov basically just looks like the same guy that he's been the last 2 years. Like, it's not that he's gotten worse. It's just that he hasn't gotten better like Konechny has. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, there were, the trade rumors that popped up last week because, Elliot Friedman talked about it in his 32 Thoughts podcast about just the feeling that there's frustration, frustration on Provorov's part, frustration on the Flyers' part. And my understanding is that, that is the case. And I don't think this is as straightforward as like Ivan Provorov is demanding a trade. I don't think it's that. But I do think that the Flyers know that Provorov isn't super happy right now. And I get it. Like, the team, this 7-8 game streak aside, like, hasn't been very good for 3 years. He's the kind of guy who he's a competitor. And the funny thing is about the Torts thing is that I actually get the sense that Torts likes Provorov a lot. Like, there's a lot of things about Provorov that Torts really likes. I'm not sure if Provorov loves John Tortorella, but I get the sense that Tortorella really does respect Provorov and his willingness to battle and his compete level and his willingness to block shots and play hard defense and take the tough minutes without complaining. Like, I think there's an admiration there for Provorov, but I think Provorov looks at it as he would much rather be playing on a team that has more skill and obviously is winning more games, that he can play the sort of creative game that he feels like he's best suited for. And that's not necessarily the game the Flyers either want to play or even can play right now, given their limitations from a talent standpoint. And look, we all know that not John Tortorella, that Ivan Provorov isn't, the most popular guy in the locker room. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that he's hated, but he's not part of the group where everybody is friends. And as a player, I'm sure you would love to be in a place where you are more loved in the room by your teammates. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, why Provorov has regressed over the last 3 or so years from kind of what I believe was his peak in 2019, 2020 as an all-around player when he was paired with Matt Niskanen. And I think they just, both sides might be reaching the point where, you know, maybe a change of scenery might be for the best. And, you know, not saying they're going to be shipping him out immediately, but I do think that they've talked about the possibility of finding him a new home. And I think part of that too is probably driven by the fact that they know Provo's got 2 years left on his deal after this one. And if he's not happy now, there's no guarantee he's going to be happy in 2 years, and there's no guarantee he's even going to want to resign. So
Yeah.
if you don't think this is a long-term thing, why not explore what sort of value you can get back for him when he's on a rental? He's got 2 more years left on his deal, and another team might look at him and say, yeah, he might not be the number one that people thought he was going to be when he was 22, but he could be a hell of a number two or number three on a contender. And maybe that's the best fit for him.
Yeah, big thing that I think he has an issue with is not being on the power play either.
Yeah.
He wants to
Yeah.
put up some points. I think there's a rub there for sure. And, with him, to me, that's more probably an off-season type move with 2 years left. And 'cause that seems like a little bit more complicated than a deadline move. Although it could happen at the deadline because, somebody shot me a question on Twitter the other day and said, if you traded Hayes and Provorov and moved them out of the lineup, how much would the team suffer? He said, I don't think very much. And I disagree. I think they would suffer because the trickle down effect there. And the guy does answer the bell every game, even though he's not what, we heard Norris talk, and I think he heard Norris talk. And,
Yeah,
and
I
I
think
think
so
that's,
too.
yeah, I think that was way premature, obviously. We got a question from the stream. Jared Phillips says, question for COC. Charlie O'Connor, he says, what is the ideal version of Risto 2.0? Stay at home D / offensive upside? And can he hit that ceiling? If he does, is that player worth a $5 million AAV? First of all, he's got to do it longer than he's done it because this is a small sample size defending. But, when you look at Risto and the changes he's made to his game, it's really dried up his offense, and a guy that put up some decent points, for 3 straight years in Buffalo. But what have you seen from Risto?
Yeah, I tweeted this out on Saturday, and it's something that has impressed me because look, I've openly been a Ristolainen critic, not even just since the trade, but going back to his time in Buffalo. I saw a really limited player. I didn't like the trade. I really didn't like the contract, but I do believe that after really working really hard with Bradshaw and John Tortorella, that Ristolainen has made some legitimate improvements to his game, particularly defensively. I see a lot less of him chasing plays, trying to, go for the big hit and taking himself completely out of position in the defensive zone. And it's shown up in the numbers. He's actually been, one of the Flyers' best defensive players in terms of isolated impact on expected goal differential, really since he was, sat down and they kind of had that talk with him. And that's what the focus is. So it's funny with Ristolainen because he's long had the reputation in hockey circles that he's this, big physical, good defensive defenseman. And then, he can add 40 points. He's got a good shot from the point. He's got some offensive upside. But if you really dived into the results, his defensive results have been bad for pretty much his entire career. And what I think the Flyers are trying to do is kind of trying to remake him into a actually good defensive defenseman, almost in the realm of like a Justin Braun from his prime. When Justin Braun was a top 4 defenseman with the San Jose Sharks and was legitimately a good defensive defenseman. Not that he's bad now, but obviously he's past his prime. He's an older defenseman. He's lost a step from where he was when he was in his 20s. And I think, it's possible they could do it. Ristolainen has always had all the tools. He's big. He can skate. He's got the long reach. He's obviously not unwilling to be physical. He loves that part of the game. So he has the tools to be molded into a really good defensive defenseman. I just kind of given up on the possibility that he ever could be because he had been bad one for so long. Well, for this season, he's been a good defensive defenseman. Now, Jared makes an interesting point, and it's one I made as well, is that if he can be molded into being that kind of guy, is he worth $5.1 million a year? And the answer is no. Like, he's not. He's probably, if he becomes a legitimately good defensive defenseman who scores 10 to 15 points a season, no, he's not worth $5 million. It's still a bad contract. But at least you're getting real value out of him, that he can serve as a legitimately good number 4, number 5 on a defense core. Like, you've signed the contract, you've got him. Like, you might as well get the most out of him as you can. Doesn't make the contract any more intelligent, but it's much better than every time he goes out there, the Flyers are trapped in their own zone and he's running around trying to get hits, and that they spend
Outside the
40
dots.
seconds. Yeah, they spend 40 seconds defending. Like, this version of Ristolainen can be a useful player if he can sustain it, which we'll see. As you said, it's a small sample. That said, this version of Ristolainen is not a $5.1 million a year player. And that's a problem when you're trying to win in a cap-centric league. That said, this is an improvement. This version of Ristolainen is much better. Yes, yeah. It's been much better than the one that we saw last year, for example.
Yeah. Have you ever seen? I think one of the most beautiful assists this season was Morgan Frost to Alexander Ovechkin. The reason I bring it up is not because of the huge gaffe, and you saw Morgan was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that."
Yeah.
And, playing under Torts, there's that fear of God that, oh my God, I could be on the bench the rest of this game and the next one after a turnover like that with that guy on the ice in that spot. But he didn't get safe. He kind of kept pushing. Have you seen some maturation from Morgan? Because, he's one of the poster child of, we need to find out what they are and what they are at the NHL this season in total. He's had some really good stretches. He's made mistakes. We'll kind of make the final judgment, I guess, at the end of the year. But what have you seen out of him now through 43 games?
Yeah, I think he definitely has more confidence. And that was, I think, inevitable. This is a guy who, and I know some fans get infuriated when they see us tweet about these sorts of things at practice, but you watch him at practice. Like, he has skills.
Yeah,
he has skills. This is a guy who can make plays that, in theory, like, that very few players in the NHL even would consider making. The skills are there. So an improvement in terms of confidence was always going to help him. And I think one thing that's really helped him in that regard is just knowing that he's not going to get sent down to the AHL, that, his coach, John Tortorella, shockingly enough, is not just going to bench him for the first mistake that he makes. And you saw it on Saturday. As you said, that turnover to Alex Ovechkin was horrible. I mean, it was awful. And then the final shift in that period, he basically just got rubbed off the puck along the boards. Like, he just looked terrible in that first period. And I was honestly wondering if he was going to be Tony DeAngelo. He was just going to get stable to the bench for the final 2 periods like DeAngelo was earlier on in the week. And Tortorella threw him out there, not just in the second period. He threw him out there for the very first shift. And that, to me, sends a message to a player that, like, look, I know I screwed up. He knows I screwed up, but there's enough of a belief in me, and you're giving me enough of a shot to make up for that mistake. And I think that's helping Frost. Now, what is Morgan Frost? I don't think we know yet. Is he an NHL caliber player? Yeah, he is. Like, he can make NHL plays. He can keep up with the pace. It's not like he's getting destroyed out there. The thing with Morgan Frost that I always come back to is that for him to be an NHL contributor on a good team, he basically has to score, because this is not a guy who I think is ever going to, drive play and be a guy who the Flyers are always going to have the puck in the offensive zone because he's making so many little subtle plays down the middle to get them up ice, nor is he ever going to be a defensive stalwart. Like, he's never going to have the value of a Noah Cates, where you can put him out there against top tier players and he can shut them down. Like, that's not going to be Frost. The only way he's going to make it in the NHL is if he scores a lot of points, because that's really his only value. And while he's getting the opportunity and he's scoring more, he's not like lighting the world on fire. It's not like he's, near point per game pace or even at like 0.75, per game pace. He's about 0.5, and he went on that good run where he was point per game for about 10 games. But
Yeah, he had
it's
two
not
8-point
like,
games against Arizona, though.
yeah, exactly. That helps when you're
Yeah.
absolutely destroying the Coyotes. That
Yeah.
certainly boosts your numbers. But it's not like he's lighting the world on fire. He's not lighting up the scoreboard every night. So you got to wonder, can he score? As an offense only player, can he score enough to be a second or third line center at the NHL level? I'm not sure yet. But the great thing about this year is he's going to get the full season to try to prove that he can be. And that's exactly what this season should be. I know
Yeah.
they've won 7 out of the last 8 games, but this is what this season is. It's finding out what Morgan Frost is so that when you make a decision on him at the end of the year, you can at least be pretty confident that if you let him go, that he's not going to go pop up in Minnesota and be a stud, like Ryan Hartman was. Like you've learned about him. And if you decide to keep him, it's because you believe he can be a good scoring middle six center who maybe gets you 50 points a year, 55, something like that a year.
Yep.
And if you don't believe he can be that, then you say, thanks for all your work, Morgan. Go see if you can find a spot on somewhere else, on somebody else's team.
Trade him to Arizona.
But you're gonna find out. Either way, you're gonna get a full year to figure it out. And he really never has had that opportunity, because of injury, because he was down in the AHL and whatnot. He's never really had that opportunity, and I'm glad he's getting it. It's just I'm not fully sold on him yet. He's got another 40 games or so.
Yeah, we need to see more. It's not going to end up being Tage Thompson.
Yeah, I don't think so. You never know. I mean, hey, if you would have told anybody 2 years ago that Tage Thompson was going to be Tage Thompson, I don't think anybody would have believed it. So
Tage Thompson wouldn't have believed it.
Right.
I mean, it's funny. He got traded, and then he played 2 games that one year. Then the next year, I think he had 12 goals. Then he comes out 35 goals. And I know the other day, I think he's got like 32 now already. I mean, he's a big frame. Sometimes the guy takes bigger guys a little longer. He's 6. I mean, he's huge. But that's one of those rarities. Deadline is March 3rd. What do you expect to happen at the deadline? People are getting scared, Flyer fans, Charlie, because they're going, oh no, are they moving closer to buyers than sellers? You know what I mean? It was tank hard for Bedard. Now we might be a buyer because we're, nipping on a wild card spot, which I really don't think they are. But, what's going to happen at the deadline?
Yeah, to me, like the 2 obvious guys that I imagine are still going to get moved are James Van Riemsdyk and Justin Braun. Braun is more like if anybody wants him, because he's not even starting on a nightly basis anymore. So there's a chance that no one is just going to have much interest in the guy. But you would think that somebody will toss the Flyers, a 5th round pick or a 6th round pick or
Rangers
something
again.
to pick up some. Yeah, just to pick up some depth defensively. He's a veteran. Yep. He's a good locker room guy. Van Riemsdyk's the big one, and I think everybody knows that he's probably getting shipped out because he's a rental. The Flyers can retain salary. Somebody's going to want him as a depth scorer on their team. He can play some power play. He can play on the third line in a sheltered role and put up some points. Beyond those 2, maybe like if the Flyers really are motivated, I'm sure they could retain enough salary to make Kevin Hayes attractive. Yeah. I just don't know if that's a deadline deal. Like if they decide they need to move on from Hayes, that might be more of an off-season deal than a deadline deal. But you never know. Sometimes guys get moved that are unexpected. Like I remember that year that Carolina got Vincent Trocheck at the deadline, and that was a surprise. Like sometimes those sort of deals come together because a team wants to fill a need, and they don't want to fill the need with a rental because the rental prices are too high. So it's like, might as well get a guy who can help us for a couple years rather than just for the next 2 months. So guys like him are out there as a possibility. There's obviously the Provorov talk. To me, that's more of an off-season deal as well. But hey, somebody bowls you over with a deal because 2 of their best defensemen got hurt and they want to make a playoff run. You never know. Maybe that's a possibility. But to me, I don't see the Flyers as buyers. And that's in part just because, like, look at a guy like JVR. JVR, I think, has value. He will get people around the league that are interested in adding him. But if the Flyers trade JVR, even if the Flyers are kind of hanging around the outskirts of the playoff race, let's say they're, 5-6 points out of the final wild card. They're not really in it, but they're in it enough that, you can at least dream. You trade JVR, you've got guys like Bobby Brink and Tyson Forrester who are pretty close. And are both of them worse than JVR right now? Yeah, probably. I mean, they're going to be rookies. They're going to make mistakes, but is it really that huge of a downgrade? Even if you're trying to, maybe make a miraculous playoff run, if in early March, they call up Tyson Forrester, and he kind of has a somewhat similar skill set, and he pops into the top 9, and then boom, you're finding out something about a young guy because this is a figure it out year, and you've got a guy with goal scoring ability who can immediately jump in and take over that role. Obviously there's some handedness things there, but I mean, you can move the lines around to make it work.
Oh yeah.
And suddenly, there you go. You traded JVR, you brought up a kid who can hopefully produce 80% of what JVR is and also has the potential to be part of the long-term future. So to me, I don't know why they would hesitate on selling, even if they stay in the mix, because they have enough guys banging down the door in the AHL that could jump up and take over those roles if they sell off the guys who they're most likely to sell.
Yeah, some people make the case that they may keep JVR just because of the chemistry with Tippett and Frost and helping those players along. But I agree with you that he fits in any locker room. He's a total pro. And they'll retain as much as they can to heighten the return. The second round pick is, kind of where you think they can get for him.
I think that's probably the best case scenario. I could see him falling anywhere in the 2nd to 4th range. But yeah, if you get a couple teams interested, I think they could get a second, maybe a conditional second, depending upon, how far the team goes in the playoffs, how many games he plays, whatever. I don't think he pulls back a first. I think it would take a perfect storm of a bunch of teams being interested. But yeah, I think a second is a reasonable hope. Maybe he ultimately gets a
2024 first.
Yeah, now you have 3. They already got the one from Florida, and let's be honest, Florida isn't looking that good right now. So that pick could potentially be higher. Yeah, that pick could end up being higher than we all thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's bananas. That change that they had a lot of change down there, and in JVR is a guy I could see him ended up in Minnesota and signing there long term. Yeah. And some people are saying a second round pick in this year's draft is worth more than a 15 and beyond first round pick in next year's draft. That's how much they're piping up this draft. Last thing for you, Charlie, how do things play out for the organizationally? I want you to grab that athletic crystal ball that so many of you guys borrow and rub. How do things play out with the organization by the start of next season?
By the start of next season, that's a fascinating question because back in December, I thought I had a real handle on what was going to happen. Based on the conversations I had with people in and around the situation, was that the chances of Chuck Fletcher being the general manager come the start of next season were pretty slim, and that this was like right after the 10-game losing streak, things were real bad. And I was getting the sense that if the Flyers went on another extended skid this season, that they might move on from Chuck and they might fully pivot to the rebuild mentality that a lot of fans want them to pivot to. Well, now they've won 7 out of their last 8 games. Now what you're seeing is exactly what Chuck Fletcher was hoping was going to happen, which is the team looks more competitive. They're kind of coalescing under Tortorella. So to me, a lot of this really boils down to how the second half of the season goes. If they crash back to earth and they, go on another extended losing streak, maybe it plays out the way I thought it was going to play out in December, where maybe they don't fire Fletcher in the middle of the season, but they move on from him at the end of the season, and they kind of pivot a little bit in terms of mentality. If they hang around the wild card race, though, I mean, let's be honest, this is what Chuck Fletcher wanted. He knew that this team probably wasn't going to make the playoffs, but he wanted them to make improvements. He wanted them to, show that Tortorella hire was the right one, and he wanted them to be able to convince ownership that a rebuild isn't necessary. If they have a good second half, maybe that happens. And I don't necessarily think that's the right decision, but you're talking about an ownership group that in the end, like they want to be convinced that a rebuild isn't necessary. They want to believe they don't have to bottom out because they don't want to bottom out. They have never wanted to bottom out. And if the Flyers have a strong second half, that just convinces them of something they wanted to already be convinced about. So I think this second half is really, really going to be important in terms of deciding the direction, maybe not necessarily the direction they should take, but the direction they actually take. Because I think at this point, everything is still on the table. They know a rebuild might be necessary, but a few more weeks like these last couple, and it gives them the ability to, maybe for lack of a better term, delude themselves into thinking they don't have to do it.
Yeah, or maybe a soft rebuild.
Yeah,
a diet rebuild.
A diet rebuild.
Yeah, like a saccharin-free rebuild, like a diet rate.
God.
I mean, the other thing too is obviously no Couturier, no Atkinson, but who the heck knows what they're going to be when they come back, when they come back. Yeah, I mean, just This assumption that they're going to be 100% what they were before, I think, is a huge leap when you look at Couturier hasn't played a hockey game since December of 2021. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in 23 now, so it's crazy.
Yeah.
Charlie, this was awesome. Game time coming up here at 1 o'clock. Flyers and Bruins. Do they shock the world and get a win over the Bruins? Hand them their second regulation loss and win a 6th straight road game?
I don't think so, but I will say if they do, I think if they beat the Bruins, especially because it's a matinee game, a lot of people are going to be paying attention. I think you're going to see a lot of stories popping out in the national media of like, did we count out the Flyers too soon? So this is a big game. I don't think they win this game. I think the Bruins are just too good, but this is an opportunity for them to, on a big stage, sort of serve notice that we're not the tanking team you thought we were.
Yeah, the people will be putting their lawn chairs out, reserving a spot on Broad Street if they win today.
And I don't think that's so much, but hey, you never know.
Jim Montgomery, probably the Jack Adams winner at this point. John Tortorella, 2 first-year coaches with their teams, and we'll see how it plays out. Charlie, this was great. Read Charlie's stuff at The Athletic. He does great work. Follow him on Twitter at Charlie Kahn. I always love talking to you, man. Enjoy the game today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jason.
There he is. Charlie O'Connor from The Athletic. Fantastic stuff. Boy, we covered a ton in that conversation. Oh, my goodness. Everything I wrote down that I wanted to get to, we got to. And a little bit more. So that was awesome to have Charlie join us on this Martin Luther King Day as the Flyers take on the Bruins coming up at 1 o'clock. I'll be picking up the Flyers broadcast coverage in about 45 minutes. So we'll get out of here with that. Let me tell you about BetParx, fantastic sportsbook app. It's mobile. It's right in your pocket. You carry it with you everywhere you go. So if you're on the move and you want to get some action in, sure, grab the BetParx app and you can do that. Player performances, same game parlays, live in-game betting, you name it. It's all there. Futures, props, teasers on football. Playoffs are underway. What a crazy weekend it was in football. So get your action on the BetParx app. You do need to be over 21 and present in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Also head down to Conquerville Subaru on Route 202 in Glen Mills. It is a fantastic dealership. Conquerville cares. That's why they support the Namor Children's Hospital of Delaware. They've been doing that. How about Marcus Hook Elementary School? Been doing that for 10 years. Getting coats for La Humildad Hispania in Kennett Square. They just do great work in the community. So make sure you stop by the dealership on Route 202 in Glen Mills. Check out the certified pre-owned inventory and all the beautiful Subaru vehicles on the lot. Take one for a test drive. And also make sure while you're there, check out the service department. You're going to love it. It is fantastic, fantastic facility. Free car wash with every visit. Visit ConcordvilleSubaru.com and visit their showroom on Route 202 in Glen Mills. And remember that Concordville cares. All right, that wraps up episode 43 of BetParx Presents Stick to Hockey Live. Everybody enjoy the hockey today. We will talk to you Wednesday on a brand new edition of BetParx Presents Stick to Hockey Live.